Depending on the day of the week, Tears of the Kingdom might be my favorite game of all time. Now, it may seem weird for me to say that, considering the title is Tears of the Kingdom Isn't Good Enough, but I'm saying this not because I think the game doesn't deserve Game of the Year or that it's just $70 DLC. I criticize the game because I love it. You see, the truth is I don't think any game is perfect. I doubt any game will ever be, but it's only in acknowledging their flaws that we might be able to get pretty close. So let's go down the list and address each problem from the mundane to the monumental and propose solutions on how they could be fixed in the next game. Oh, but first I am going to spoil the entire game, so if you haven't finished it yet, don't close the video, because this silly little chart determines my value as a human being in the face of the machine. Instead, just mute the tab and do some push-ups, call a friend, or I don't know, take your dog for a walk. I don't think any sane person is arguing against the gameplay of Tears of the Kingdom. Every aspect of it, from puzzles to the exploration to the combat, are all extraordinarily expressive in that you can really do anything that you can imagine. But I do want to focus on that last part. The combat is great, and I think its biggest strength comes from its expressiveness. You're able to do things like fuse a flamethrower to a shield, allowing you to attack enemies while guarding, or fuse a shield to a two-handed weapon to give it the ability to parry. But that's just scratching the surface. Fuse is so brilliant because it fundamentally changes the resource loop that existed in Breath of the Wild. Now you actually have a reason to fight. In Breath of the Wild, you could raid an enemy camp only to leave with some topaz, a new bow, and 4 less weapons than you had when you entered. In Tears, base weapons all have relatively low stats. Your attack is instead increased by attaching materials to those weapons. So now when you raid the same enemy camp and get a bunch of clubs and monster parts, you can fuse them together to make more powerful weapons. It's in this way that you actually leave the camp stronger than you were when you entered it. You can even fuse materials to arrows, and while this is great too, it's where the problems start to occur. Let me show you something that sneaks its way into nearly every combat video of this game. It's pretty subtle, and if you haven't played the game, you probably didn't catch it, but I actually cheated right there. Let's go back. See, what I and most people do is record the game normally and then cut this little part out and blend it seamlessly. The problem is, you can't do that when you actually play the game. This constant pausing mid-combat not only hurts the flow, but it also disincentivizes you from trying out new materials, because every time you want to try a new one, you have to pause the fight and scroll through 100 different items to reach it. Now, admittedly, this is a hard problem to solve, and I think Nintendo did the best job they could, all things considered. But here's what I would do if I had a multi-billion-dollar company, a franchise that has sold well over 100 million units, and a team of some of the most talented programmers on the planet. First, you could have a shortcut item. If, for example, you're in Hebra and you're constantly using fire arrows, you could simply set the fire fruit to your shortcut, double tap up, and instantly fuse the fire fruit. Now, while the solution works if you're only using one item, it hurts the expressiveness of the combat. So Part 2 aims to fix that. Simply add a favorites tab. In this tab, you can set 5 to 10 favorite items that you want to fuse. This is similar to the recently used tab, but it's a bit more structured since you're now in total control of what appears on it. So now if you hear about the Muddlebud and its effects on monsters, you can throw it into your favorites to try it out next time you're in a fight instead of having to scroll through 50 items. But that's not the only problem that plagues the combat. Sage powers are great, and they're not just more balanced than their parallels in Breath of the Wild, but they're more fun as well. Now, instead of simply deleting a group of enemies because you held Y, you can create a precise strike of lightning in the center of them, or use that lightning to hit explosives. This forces you to think about how lightning can interact with the environment instead of just shocking everyone in a simple AoE. And all of the powers are like this. They're all slightly weaker, more engaging versions of the abilities in Breath of the Wild, but they do have a serious flaw that keeps them from being as fun as they could be. They are, quite bafflingly, all mapped to the same button, and to make matters worse, you have to stand right next to your AI companion to use them. Of all the grievances I have with this game, this one is genuinely the most confusing, since it just feels clunky and untested. I mean, surely someone ran into the problem of Tulin blowing their stuff away, or trying to catch Riju so you can use her lightning as she sprints off to the other side of the battlefield, or accidentally hopping on top of Minoru when you meant to use Sidon's shield, thereby plucking you from the water and turning you into a sitting duck. I distinctly recall thinking how cool these powers were as I received them, but also quickly getting this thought of, oh no, they're really all gonna use the same button, aren't they? My solution to this, again, shortcuts, but this time a bit different. My problem with menuing in Tears of the Kingdom is that there are too many options to sort through, but there are only 5 sages. This means that you can have a system similar to Raru's hand, where upon pressing the button you get a wheel of 5 options, each of which will summon a sage directly to you so you can use their abilities. However, a problem you may immediately notice is button mapping. Which button am I going to replace? If you look at the Pro Controller, every button is already used up, except for the subscribe button of course, which you can press at any time. So we're gonna have to remove one, and I think the answer is obvious. While whistling isn't totally useless in combat, let's be honest, the ability to use Sage's powers far more consistently outweighs it tenfold. Now, speaking of those sages, there's a significantly larger problem that affects them outside of combat. Okay, so let's talk about the second worst part of this game. The sage cutscenes are pretty bad, and this is especially frustrating because the story in this game has incredible potential, and when it shines, it is without a doubt my favorite in the series, but its low points are nothing short of embarrassing. So the sage cutscenes go something like this.
Tulin, my brave fledgling.
I know that voice. You're the one who's been talking all this time.
Yes, I am your ancestor from a time long past.
I was a Garuda warrior who served the
First king. I was a Rito warrior and a sage with control of the
water. You are the pride of the
Gorons. You defeated that monster.
But it was a servant of a greater evil, the Demon King.
Demon King? Secret Stone?
Do I actually need to explain the problem here? Look, I get it. The task of creating a story when you don't know where the player is at any given moment is impossibly difficult, and I don't envy those who have to figure out how to solve that. But what if I told you it's actually a lot easier than it looks? Well, in this particular situation at least. So solution number 1, change the dialogue based on the number of dungeons completed. This is the hardest and least practical solution, but let's be honest, this isn't a small indie studio. Nintendo is one of the largest gaming companies on the planet, and Zelda is their second, maybe third biggest IP. I don't think this is asking too much. Granted, maybe it is, and if that's the case, we can then look at solution number 2, which is my personal favorite. Don't change the dialogue and just create 4 unique scenes instead. These scenes could be a few things. We know almost nothing about the sages of Raru's time, so maybe each scene talks about those specific characters. What was their life like? Why did they choose to become sages? That's a huge responsibility. I mean, you're devoting your life to fighting someone called the Demon King. Surely there's more to you than just being strong or fast. The scenes could also be about Zelda and her interactions with the 4 villages and their inhabitants in the past. Maybe the villages were different, and Zelda, being the history nerd that she is, can talk about that. This fleshes out Zelda's character and makes it hurt even more when she decides to do the whole lizard thing later on. We could, however, have the inverse of this with Ganondorf and how he affected the villages of the past. We know even less about Ganon than we do about Zelda, so having his character be more fleshed out through these scenes would make our final showdown with him even more impactful. I like this solution so much because it doesn't just force you to create hundreds of unique pieces of dialogue based on how far the player is. It just requires 4 and slightly longer cutscenes with more writing than before. Which, again, multi-billion-dollar company. I'm asking for 4 unique cutscenes. Now, the final problem is by far the most disappointing and is, to me, the biggest flaw in Tears of the Kingdom. So let me recap the story of Tears of the Kingdom real quick. The story begins when Ganondorf wakes up and Zelda falls back in time. She lands in ancient Hyrule and Queen Sonia is stabbed in the back by Phantom Zelda. Zelda then has tea with Queen Sonia and King Raru. Raru then sacrifices himself to stop powered up Ganondorf, sealing him away for thousands of years. Ganondorf steals Sonia's secret stone to power up and turn into the Demon King. Zelda stares awestruck at the landscape with Raru and Sonia, realizing she's been transported back in time. Then she turns into a dragon. Okay, so the events are slightly out of order. Look, the memories or tears in this case are done so much better than Breath of the Wild. The stakes are so much higher because you want to know what happened to Zelda and what's going on in the past, and the story itself is so much better than in Breath of the Wild. But it's the order of these tiers that really messes everything up. And that's only so frustrating because this is such an easy problem to fix. The mystery of this fake Zelda was genuinely so interesting for the first few hours of the game, and the mystery of what happened to the real Zelda was equally intriguing, but they didn't last very long. The problem with these out of order events is that it becomes comically easy to piece things together if you visit them in the wrong order. So it's a good thing that the memory about turning into a dragon is located as far from the starting point as possible. Okay, but even if it was, it wouldn't really matter. Remember, this game is all about going in whichever direction you want, so surely some unlucky player will find tiers 3 and 11 as their first two, and they'll immediately know the biggest twist of the story. Now, is this the end of the world? No, of course not. This is really less of a negative and more of a missed positive. You didn't pick up Tears of the Kingdom for the gripping narrative or winding plot or deep characters, but that's the problem. They kinda tried to do that here. I mean, sure, the characters are about as plain as white bread, but if told in the right order, this plot isn't bad. In fact, it's actually pretty good. Zelda disappears, goes back in time, learns about the kingdom and its crazy powerful first king and his conflicts with Ganondorf, and eventually realizes that she has to make the ultimate sacrifice to give Link a chance to defeat the Demon King. Because remember, Zelda didn't know for sure if her plan was going to work. This is evidenced by the fact that when she wakes up, she's not just confused about being a human again, but she also says,
"I'm not in a dream, right? You did it. Oh, Link, you really did it."
Zelda didn't know if this plan would work. She sacrificed everything to give somebody else a chance to stop Ganondorf. This is so brilliant because when Ganondorf does the same thing, he says,
Sacrifice it all to destroy you, and cast this world into eternal night.
he's doing the polar opposite of what Zelda did in every way. He's sacrificing everything for the guarantee that he himself will destroy Link and the world. This is just such a cool parallel that plays perfectly with the themes of teamwork, companionship, and trust throughout the game, which is why it's such a shame that the memories are told out of order. If everything was told in the right order, you not only have this genuinely engaging mystery that's gradually unveiled before you, but you also avoid annoying moments throughout the game where Link for some reason refuses to tell anyone that the Phantom isn't actually Zelda. So with all of that out of the way, how do we fix this? Well, just show the memories in a set order. Yeah, that's it. If the player has seen 3 memories, show them number 4, and so on. This not only helps the plot, but it also makes more sense since these are Zelda's memories. The events should be shown in chronological order. Kinda like when you recall a sequence of events, you don't remember the events in a random order, but in the order that they happened. Now look, I might be a bit hard on this game, but I do it out of love. If I didn't like the game, I would have done the exact same thing I do with every other game that I don't like. Drop it, never talk about it, and move on. I can say with confidence that this is one of the greatest games ever made, and in a series of masterpieces, this might be the best one. But despite that, if we're not willing to critique it, then this'll be as good as that series ever gets. Now, if you want to see a larger problem that affects not just Tears of the Kingdom, but only the best games, check out this video.